In as little as 3 weeks since the finale of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, numerous fans have taken it upon themselves to do whatever they could in the editing bay to churn out a more satisfying final product. I've seen a couple of these fan edits myself, and while they're not perfect, they do indeed address and correct a lot of the issues that I myself had with the series, as it was presented in its original 6 episode format on Disney Plus. Now, when I say not perfect, that is of no fault to any of the fans who produced their own cuts or fan edits of the series. They certainly did the best with what they had. No matter how much anyone removes, adds, or restructures, we'll always be left with a sort of lackluster Obi-Wan Kenobi series because, well, to my great disappointment, that's inevitably what it was. Without having the ability to rewrite the scripts and reshoot the series altogether, we're ultimately stuck with a more palatable fan edit of the series or 6 episodes of a somewhat disjointed and directionless series on Disney Plus that fails to tell a compelling narrative, lacks character development, and has an unsatisfying conclusion. So in this video, I'm going to discuss why these fan edits are succeeding where Disney and Lucasfilm themselves have failed, and to do that, we're going to need to address what went wrong in the Kenobi series. I'll also discuss some aspects of the show that I think actually worked, and may have even added some more weight to a couple key moments that take place in other Star Wars material, but that being said, just remember, these are my opinions. I'm not here to convince you of anything. It's okay for you to agree or disagree with any of my takes, and in fact, I would love to hear what you all have to say down in the comment section below in regards to the Kenobi series in general or anything that I go over in this video. Now, for me, the way I try to approach all entertainment, be it a movie, TV series, video game, etc., is pretty simple. In the end, I just want to go on a fun journey with good characters and be told a good, exciting story. It doesn't have to be filled with earth shattering consequences that change my entire outlook on life. No, it just needs to be good, fun, entertaining experience. Despite what side of the fence you fall on with the Kenobi series, I'll pose the same question to you that I always ask myself. Did the Obi-Wan series tell a good story? Were the characters well written? Were their journeys unique and their story arcs compelling? For me, I'm not so sure, but if you thought they were, that's great, and I'm glad it worked for you. But if not, that's okay too. So what went wrong with Kenobi? It's not fair to say that it simply didn't live up to fans' expectations because, quite frankly, nothing ever does. Everyone has their own unique perspectives and will always have their own expectations and speculations regarding all forms of content within their fandoms of choice. I'd go as far as to say that a major problem we face today is that many people, myself included, will often allow their speculations regarding what could or quote unquote should not happen in a series, movie, or video game, or any other content surrounding the fandom of their choice become their expectations. We all will ultimately set ourselves up for failure and disappointment by allowing our speculations to become our expectations. But hey, we're all human, no one is infallible, and the reason this happens is because we're all passionate about our fandoms. Star Wars is one of, and arguably the largest, most beloved, and most successful franchise of all time. To this date, nothing has left as large of an imprint globally on pop culture and fandom alike. Star Wars has been in the minds and hearts of fans around the world for the last 50 years, and it's arguably even more relevant today than ever before, considering there is more Star Wars content being created regularly, spanning multiple mediums across novels, comics, video games, and TV series, rather than just the films themselves. I think it's fair to say that Star Wars fandom has been fairly divisive ever since the prequels, and arguably even more so with the release of the sequel trilogy. But throughout the years of divisiveness, I think most everyone would agree that Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi was well received and outright celebrated ever since his debut in the prequels. I would go as far as to say that for myself, Ewan's Obi-Wan is probably my favorite on-screen or live-action Star Wars character to date. I've always loved his portrayal of the character, the charisma he brings to the role is fantastic, and I appreciate that he always paid homage to Sir Alec Guinness's portrayal by invoking many of his mannerisms into his own performance. All that being said, I was obviously an easy sell for the Kenobi series, and I'm happy that we got it, despite its flaws. Little information was known about the series when it was first announced, but having Ewan's Obi-Wan Kenobi back on screen in any capacity is enough to get most Star Wars fans excited. Excitement and anticipation was likely at its peak when Kathleen Kennedy, the president of Lucasfilm, made the announcement that Hayden Christensen would reprise the role of Darth Vader slash Anakin Skywalker in the series and promised, quote unquote, the rematch of the century. Now, this is a bold claim considering the duel on Mustafar between Anakin and Obi-Wan is arguably still, to this day, the best live-action lightsaber duel. Many fans questioned what this series, and particularly this rematch, would mean for canon, given the dialogue between the two characters when they meet in A New Hope and Vader exclaims,
"When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master."
and Kenobi rebuttals,
"Only a master of evil, Darth."
and frankly, minor changes to canon wouldn't bother me if they make sense or provide a great deal more context to a previous situation. Take Boba Fett, for instance. He was initially intended to be dead post-original trilogy, later lived on in Legends material, but then Disney proclaimed Legends was no longer canon, but then eventually brought Boba back in the canon through the comics, then again in The Mandalorian and live action, and then to his own series in the Book of the Book of Boba Fett. Side note, if we table our thoughts on the overall story or the backstory given to the Boba Fett character in the Book of Boba Fett, I believe the Boba Fett show could have worked a lot better for the audience if it had actually been subtitled The Book of Boba Fett under the banner of The Mandalorian, thus being called The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, which would have clearly indicated to the audience that this is ultimately a spin-off or a continuation of the Mandalorian series and story, thus making this Boba Fett show be merely a chapter within the overall Mando story, more so than it being, perceived as a fully fledged Boba Fett story, because ultimately the show's climax not only contained a Mando and Boba team up, but the Mando episodes that occurred within the Book of Boba Fett were crucial to the overall Mando story, literally bridging the ending of season 2 narratively to the beginning of season 3. And quite frankly, those were some of the absolute best Mando episodes to date. While subtitling the show and marketing it as a chapter of Mando's story, rather than a solo Boba Fett show, wouldn't actually change any of the content itself, but I feel like it would have hit the audience a bit differently, given their expectations could have been put in more of an accurate perspective. But I digress. This could have been its own video altogether, so let's get back to
Kenobi!
Now, I would say the best way for me to describe the Kenobi series is that it was a show that had a lot of great moments, but ultimately suffered from an identity crisis. It lacked what I would consider to be a more proper and cohesive narrative for the titular character of Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. On the one hand, you have this story surrounding Darth Vader and the Inquisitors hunting down the remaining Jedi, a political drama throughout the ranks of the Inquisitors, and further surrounding their ascension to the Grand Inquisitor, and at the heart of all of that being the third sister, Reva. Now, say what you will about the Reva character herself or how the actress was portrayed. I think the actress did the best she could do with the material she was given, because I know there was a lot of backlash that came out with the Reva character, but all things considered, it was not her fault. It was the script's fault and ultimately the way she was directed. So I think she did the best she could do. But in principle, the Reva character is a very compelling character. You have to consider for a second that it's a story involving a youngling who survived the raid on the Jedi Temple during Order 66, led by Anakin/Vader and his 501st Troopers, who then goes on to become an Inquisitor herself. This Inquisitor is simultaneously fueled by hatred and rage towards the Jedi Order for allowing Order 66 to happen on their watch, and towards Anakin/Vader for leading the assault that ultimately led to the death of all of her friends and everything what she was training for as a Jedi in general. Then you're left with this former youngling who has essentially vowed to get revenge on everyone who was responsible for the Jedi's failure to protect and allow a Sith insurgency, and Vader for the part that he played in it all, biding her time, climbing the ranks as an Inquisitor to eventually obtain the ranking of Grand Inquisitor just so she can finally be close enough to Vader to have a shot at killing him herself. Now, on paper, as I said, that is all a very, very compelling story in its own right, even reducing the show down to just being Vader hunting the remaining Jedi, dealing with the Emperor's Inquisitors, who, he notoriously hates and does not respect. That is a compelling story in its own right. So in retrospect, I believe all these clashing narratives is inevitably what became the pitfall of the Kenobi series. They had all these very compelling story beats and ideas, all crammed into this story that was advertised as a Kenobi series, when in all reality, Kenobi was just kind of along for the ride. Kenobi himself was never really pushing the plot forward. The events of the series were ultimately being driven by Vader and the Inquisitors. I ultimately believe that this affected how the show was received because it was advertised, like I said, as an Obi-Wan Kenobi series. But we really got this hodgepodge of stories that converge and were forced upon the Obi-Wan character. And don't get me wrong, I love all these concepts and story beats that were introduced, and I would have loved to have seen all of these stories that were presented in the show on their own. But because it was only 6 episodes long, they simply did not have enough time to work in all these story beats effectively. It felt rushed and ultimately lacked character development across the board. The first episode and the finale episode were the only 2 episodes that really brought anything remotely new to the way that we understand the characters of Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The events that occurred through episodes 2 and 5 could be entirely removed, and it changes nothing more than some cool Easter eggs and homages to events that have already happened or occurred in other Star Wars material at one time or another, which has been further proven and solidified through the release of numerous fan edits at the time, which in the end they ultimately remove all of the non-essential footage, the non-essential plot, and the characters that were introduced essentially all in episodes 2 through 5, and restructures the series to focus as much as possible on the Obi-Wan character himself. With that being said, on a fundamental level, regarding any content, Star Wars or otherwise, the best and most satisfying moments of your overall story should not just be callbacks or homages to things we've already seen in other mediums. Some examples of this in the Kenobi series being,
Hello there.
to child Luke Skywalker at the end of the series, the infamous Obi-Wan Mulan pose with the 2 fingers, extended and the lightsaber back behind his head, first seen in Revenge of the Sith, and then the final battle of the series between him and Vader. Callbacks to Obi-Wan's and Anakin's dialogue during their battle on Mustafar and Revenge of the Sith.
I will do what I must. I will do what I must.
You will try.
Then you will die.
Then nearly shot for shot recreating scenes that we had already seen another Jedi do, known as Cal Kestis, do in the Jedi Fallen Order video game at the Fortress Inquisitorius.
I've disabled the shields on the outer sections of the fortress. Flood the base and swim to the central keep.
It's a hell of a plan. Ready for a swim, BD? Hang on.
Then one of the more obvious ones being the homage to the Vader and Ahsoka fight that takes place in Rebels, where she too takes a chunk out of Vader's helmet to reveal the face of her former master and friend, Anakin Skywalker. And again, don't get me wrong, I like seeing Obi-Wan, who like I said at the top of the video, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan in particular is probably my favorite live-action Star Wars character. I love him. And with the Vader and Obi-Wan, having their duel and the mask getting cut off, I like the poetry that it did have with the Ahsoka scene, because, when Ahsoka did it, it was broken on one side, and then when Obi-Wan did it, it was broken on the other. So all that's great. But that wasn't the end of them by any means. There were other ones throughout the series that occurred, but another one that comes to mind as well is you even had Vader getting his own Galen Merrick, aka Starkiller, force pulling a starship down. And all of these scenes were great in the show, but it wasn't anything that we hadn't already seen before. These scenes have all happened in one form or another throughout the Star Wars universe by other characters or even by the same characters in different mediums. Again, as I stated earlier, it's not that every second spent on screen needs to be something new and revelatory, but the scenes and or moments that some folks claim to have been the best of the series or were their favorite scenes in the series. Again, shouldn't all just be homages or recreations of things we've already seen before, right? There are some things that the show did that actually improved some of the character dynamics and dialogue in A New Hope, primarily Vader telling Obi-Wan during their final fight in the finale of the series that it was he himself slash Vader who killed Anakin Skywalker, not Obi-Wan, thus making Obi-Wan's dialogue with Luke regarding the death of his father and how he knew his father and everything in those lines. It makes those scenes hold a lot more weight and brings some clarity to the scene where he quote-unquote lies to Luke, saying that Vader was responsible for the death of his father. Now we know that is of course true
from a certain point of view.
Another taking place during that dialogue exchange when Obi-Wan exclaims,
"And my friend is truly dead."
Then before he leaves, he further solidifies the death of Anakin Skywalker with a simple phrase,
"Goodbye, Darth."
Which then parallels, or rhymes as George Lucas would say, the dialogue exchange between the two when they meet in A New Hope, and again, he says the line,
Only a master of evil, Darth.
So while I appreciate the things in the show that worked, again, I just can't help to feel that the show ultimately lacked the titular character of Obi-Wan Kenobi. For instance, we didn't get a deeper exploration of his survivor's guilt as a former general and Jedi Master, nor the pain he has endured for having killed his best friend and pupil, Anakin Skywalker. These things were vaguely touched upon in the series before our protagonist is thrusted into a new situation that doesn't allow us any time to better understand where he's at mentally and spiritually. The story inevitably ends with Kenobi right where we left him after Revenge of the Sith. He faced Vader, won, went into hiding on Tatooine, and continues his training with his former master Qui-Gon Jinn. When I describe that, you literally wouldn't be able to know if I was talking about Revenge of the Sith or the finale of Kenobi, because they're exactly the same. We leave him in the exact same place that we found him at the beginning of the series. As I touched on before, if this show had been marketed and was actually written and centered around being a show about Vader and the Inquisitors, with the premise of them hunting down the remaining Jedi, then within that show, we see Vader finally come across his former master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, rather than it being marketed as an Obi-Wan Kenobi show, I think it would have been a lot better received. The approach would have even allowed them to be able to cut a lot of the non-essential stuff that occurred in the series out, like saving Princess Leia twice, and instead use that time to expand upon the dynamics between the Emperor, Vader, and the Inquisitors, and I think that would have worked much better. In truth, the story I would have rather seen and somewhat even expected out of an Obi-Wan Kenobi series would have, for one, focused on Kenobi himself, and maybe would have explored a new story that we haven't seen during the events and era of the Clone Wars with Anakin and Obi-Wan. And as George Lucas would say, have that rhyme be poetic with the overall story that's being told within our present day, set 10 years after the events of the end of Revenge of the Sith, just as the show was taking place, with a broken and guilt-ridden Obi-Wan Kenobi, very much akin to The Godfather Part 2 in that we're following this flashback story in the Clone Wars era, and those events are, as they play out, they are informing the present-day situation that we find our characters in right now. And as a Hot Toys collector and a Clone Wars fan, it was a huge, missed opportunity to finally have Kenobi and Anakin rocking their Clone Wars era armor from the animated series for the first time in live action. Now, I want to be clear here too. I acknowledge that I may have spent a lot of time on the negatives of the series, but I would indeed say that I appreciated the series overall, despite the flaws. I'm not a Star Wars or Disney Star Wars hater in any way. I choose to be a Star Wars appreciator, damn it. I always acknowledge that there have been some choices made with Star Wars throughout the years that I don't necessarily like or agree with, but in the end, I love Star Wars. Always have and always will. I have a rather large Hot Toys collection that is for the most part exclusively Star Wars, so I'm a fan for life. And it's very easy to play Monday morning quarterback. Hindsight is always 20/20, and people seem to forget that making movies and TV series is not an easy job, especially making good ones. No matter how good the content is, you'll never please everyone. So for me, when I absorb content, I try to focus on things that I like from the show as opposed to dwelling on all the negative aspects. And in the end, I think everyone should take a step back and just appreciate the existence of the series in general and remember that it's okay not to like the show. It's okay to love the show. It's all subjective. Art, movies, television, it hits everyone differently, and someone else's opinion should not influence your own, and it certainly isn't a personal attack on your character if someone doesn't like the same entertainment as you, or vice versa. So to wrap up, I'd like to give a shout out to two folks who have made some fan edits of the Kenobi series, Pentex and Kai Patterson. I'm going to put up the links to their fan edits in the description of the video, but both of them have gone out of the way and restructured the narrative down to about a 2 to 2.5 hour feature film that actually takes a lot of the things that I touched on in this video and brings them to life. Both in regards to the story and how it should have focused more on Kenobi and his internal struggles, and emphasizes it all just through some thoughtful editing and some cutting of all the fat, and for the most part, leaving only the bulk of the events from episode 1 and 6, but sprinkling in the more crucial plot and narrative beats from episodes 2 and 5, as I previously suggested. Now, obviously, like I mentioned before, they could only work with what we all got from the series, so they're only able to use the pre-existing footage from the series itself and from other Star Wars material. Unfortunately, we're not able to rewrite the script or reshoot a new series altogether, but it's pretty remarkable what these folks pulled off with nothing more than a little thoughtful editing to restructure the narrative of the entire series. I don't want to give too much away in regards to what all was left in and removed from their cuts, so you'll just need to see them for yourself. So I'll leave a link in the description so you can take a look if you'd like. I would argue that these edits do indeed provide a much more streamlined and focused narrative when compared to how it was originally presented to us in the 6-episode format on Disney+. But in the event you're on the fence about watching any fan edits, here's a couple of examples of some of the changes that were made. Again, I'm not confirming whether these changes are even present in the two aforementioned edits done by Kai and Pentex. These are just two changes that occur in fan edits in general that I've either read about somewhere or maybe seen, but both of these don't necessarily occur in either of these two fan edits because I don't want to spoil anything. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but nevertheless, one of them during the Vader and Kenobi rematch in the finale, Obi-Wan hears Qui-Gon say,
"He is the chosen one. He will bring balance."
Just as he has gotten the upper hand and essentially beaten Vader. Now, that simple addition provides an easy and in-universe canon explanation as to why Obi-Wan would leave Vader alive at the end of the series rather than killing him. The second one recuts the scene with the second ship escaping Vader by restructuring the scene to have Reva step in and attack him right at that point, thus allowing an opportunity for the second ship to escape because he is now distracted by fighting Reva, rather than it playing out the way that it did in the show, with Vader just kind of standing there doing nothing when the second ship takes off. So yeah, as I said, it's small things, but it's pretty remarkable what some thoughtful editing and additions from previous Star Wars material used as, force visions or force voices can really do. So yes, it's just little things like that that inevitably, like the title of this video said, just how these fan edits have just done the Kenobi series more justice than Lucasfilm and Disney did on their own. They went out of the way, they centered the story as much as they possibly could with the footage we were given on Kenobi himself, put in a couple little things here and there that better influence the character and his motivations within, better music choices, just little things like that. Just really, honestly, like I said, it's remarkable what a difference some of these just thoughtful editing choices could do to take a fairly lackluster series and make it watchable. Not so much just watchable, let's say enjoyable. A good watch. So again, guys, those are some of my thoughts on the show. The TLDR would be that it lacked character development and depth for the titular character himself, and didn't quite live up to the promise of the rematch of the century. Now, don't get me wrong, I liked the end battle, but it was certainly not on the level of their duel on Mustafar, but I'm really curious about what you all thought. Have you guys watched any of the fan edits? Are there any that I did not mention here that you've seen that you think I should take a look at? If so, let me know down in the comments, and just let me know if you guys even like the series. Did you like the series as it was? Do you think it was well done? Was there anything that, I didn't mention that they could have done in the show to make it better? Whatever it may be, let me know down in the comment section below. And thank you for watching. But other than that, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.